Follow us at Politics Radio. Politics powered by Twitter.
SiriusXM POTUS.
You are listening to Politics Powered by Twitter. I'm Lee Brenner. You can reach me at Deep Dish Paul.
I'm Slade Somer. I'm at Slade HV, as in hyper vocal.
And I'm Pamela Kirkland at Pamela XM POTUS.
Joining us now is Adam Sharp, who leads Twitter's government news and social innovation team, and they basically put out this Twitter index. Adam, how you doing?
Doing well, gang. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. So big day for you guys. You launched the Twindex. So how did this come about? What was the goal here?
Well, really, this was the result of 7 months of effort between us and our three partners, the social analytics firm Topsy and two polling firms, the Mellman Group and North Star Opinion Research. And where we really started was just looking at the massive volume of data that has emerged around this election. You know, if you look at the volume today, there are 400 million tweets sent on Twitter each day. That means more tweets are sent every 2 days than had ever been sent in the 2.5 years before the 2008 election. You know, Twitter was founded, of course, March of 2006. And so what this has given us for the first time is a measurable look into conversations that used to be just in coffee shops and the water cooler and are now happening in a public space. So we went and dug into it to see what we could draw from that to get a better picture of the electorate as it stands today. And so that's what we launched, a daily measure of Twitter users' attitudes towards the candidates as expressed through their tweets.
Well, that's great. We have a couple questions just about the inner workings of this thing that, I think would really benefit our audience. One of which, and Lee will kind of get into the scale thing in a second. My question, because I'm a sarcastic jerk, I think the nuance and sarcasm is really what makes Twitter, one of the best platforms in like the history of conversation. How do you measure for sarcasm and nuance?
Well, actually, Topsy has developed a pretty advanced algorithm to suss out those things. And you're right. It's not as easy as a traditional poll where you can be asking a yes-no question and you have an easy binary answer. And so through sarcasm and everything else, you do have a bit of a gray area around that dividing line. So one of the ways that the index and Topsy, with the engineering behind it, is able to adjust for that is by testing an iteration. They will routinely take tens of thousands of tweets that they've classified one way or the other as being positive or negative and show those tweets to a random sample of human beings, actual people, to say, well, what do you think of these? And in the last test, they found that more than 90% of the time, a random human being would come up with the same result as the algorithm in determining whether something was positive or negative. And a lot of that gap that's left over is not necessarily because the algorithm is wrong and the human's right or vice versa. It's actually because humans can't agree. If you were to show that same tweet to somebody else, they'd give you a different answer than the first human, so you really don't know what is right or wrong at that point. But through that process, we're able to identify those terms of phrase, those abbreviations that maybe were not previously in the model, and make the model smarter. So the more and more time that goes on, the higher and higher that confidence level increases.
So what constitutes a 67? I mean, what I mean by that is, how did you decide on a 1 to 100 rating chart versus 1 to 10 or 1 to 5? And obviously it's 1 to 100. It's an easy go-to number. But was there any thought behind that specifically?
You wanted us to go with 73, didn't you?
I thought that go crazy. I think so.
Live on the edge, man.
Exactly. No. So the best way to think of it is sort of what percentile the candidates fall in regards to the entire Twitter conversation. You see, what's happening is Topsy's actually evaluating every single tweet on Twitter each and every day and measuring the sentiment across the entire conversation, not just politics, but on every other issue, and seeing where the conversation about the candidate fits in there. So use the example 67. What does a 67 mean for a candidate? What that means is that tweets about that candidate are on average more positive in their tone than 67% of the tweets on all the other subjects in the world.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, so let's take today's numbers. It was Barack Obama was, 34 and Romney was 25?
Yes.
So break that down for our listeners. What exactly, what does that say about these candidates on this particular day?
Okay, well, an important thing to note at the outset is that these are not head-to-head numbers.
Right.
In that it's not like a who are you voting for poll where one has to go up for the other to go down or vice versa. They are each being measured individually against this baseline of essentially the emotion of the world. So these numbers, both being below 50%, which is the neutral point, 50 would mean that there are as many topics that are more positive than the candidate as there are more negative. Because both of these are below 50, that means that there are a lot more topics on Twitter today that people are more positive on than they are the candidates, and compared with less. So for Barack Obama, 34 means if you were to line up every single tweet in the world from 0 being the absolute most negative to 100 being the most positive, right at that 34 spot would be where you'd put the average tweet about President Obama.
Let me ask you this question: Is there a possibility that the sentiment is going to be based on everything else and not the candidate? In other words, if tomorrow we wake up and almost everyone on Twitter is talking about how the puppy in their house is the cutest thing that ever happened in the world, and that the Olympians did really well, last night, and everyone just somehow wakes up super positive about everything, and they're like kind of meh on Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. Does that affects their score, right?
As a chalkboard exercise, that would be true. The reality is, though, that the data size has now gotten so big that at that scale, the world is a surprisingly stable place.
Okay.
And
you
really? Don't see those
the world is stable?
You don't see those huge shifts day to day because, sure, one country might be really happy, but another one isn't. And there's also some smoothing in that algorithm to make sure that stays as a relatively stable baseline. But to give an example of why you would want to use that context as a baseline rather than, say, just arbitrarily saying, okay, this tweet is an example of 100 and this tweet is an example of 0, and we're going to split it in half. If you think of the entire Twitter community as sort of a person that walks into a party, and that person's going around to everyone in the room saying, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, but they walk up and say, but Lee, I like you. You would consider that to be positive sentiment.
Right.
But if another person walked into that same room and went around the room hugging everybody, kissing them on the cheek and saying, I love everyone, but Lee, I like you.
I'd be annoyed.
You'd be annoyed because you would actually consider that to be negative.
Right.
And so the context, that sort of background emotion, is essential to determining whether or not that same exact phrase is actually a good thing or a bad thing.
So using something you said before that humans don't get along, let me ask you about the U.S. government. So what you got, your role as, you were the first person with Twitter to be here in Washington, D.C. and really help politicians, both candidates and electeds and journalists, figure out how to use this new medium, even though it's, as you mentioned, it's almost 6 years old. As people are already starting, obviously, tweeting, and it's becoming a must for any campaign or politician, what are you seeing that's kind of next on the horizon? What are you trying to push out to Congress, for instance?
Well, I think with Congress, there's been tremendous progress just over the course of this Congress. Last January 5th, when this Congress was sworn in, only about a third of the House and Senate even had Twitter accounts. Now that number is over 90%. So you've seen that first step of getting a Twitter account and starting to use it. There are a lot of members, particularly in the Senate, when you look at people like Claire McCaskill, Chuck Grassley, John Cornyn, and others who do the tweeting themselves and have developed strong relationships with their constituents that way. But admittedly, there are a lot of offices as well that still use Twitter as a press release distribution mechanism. and not much else. And so I think the trend that you're going to see now, if this past Congress was about members creating their accounts and dangling their toes in the water, you're now going to see more and more of a trend towards actual engagement and having a back-and-forth conversation with a little bit less of the formality with constituents, recognizing that Twitter as a platform really marks the first scalable return to retail politics. The same is true today as was true 100 years ago, that the best way to get someone's vote is to stick your hand out and say, "Hi, I'm running for Congress. Can I have your vote?" But that approach doesn't scale to the population our country has reached today. So we've invented all these technologies over the last 100 years to get to a more broadcast model of communicating with constituents. TV, radio, billboards, direct mail, robocalls, etc. And so it's no surprise that polls show people thinking their elected representatives are out of touch, because in reality, they're in less touch. And so Twitter and other social platforms now empower members to, in a scalable way, actually get back to some of that one-on-one interaction that they'd been missing.
Well, that's great, and good luck with all those innovations at Twitter and with this Twitter Political Index. We're certainly intrigued. We wrote a couple articles about it on hypervocal.com today, and we've been talking about it all show. I think it's got tremendous potential, and we want to wish you congratulations.
Great. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the new show.
Thank you. Before we go, though, 2 to 3 must-follows on Twitter: politicians, strategists, journalists. What do you got for us?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, being a D.C. person in the wake of several storms, I think the Capitol Weather Gang is always a strong one for me. I tend to follow a lot of food accounts, so I think Alton Brown and Michael Woolman and a few others. But then for politics, I think my favorite sort of insider in terms of tweeting out the political game, Mark Knoller over at the White House for CBS News, who has really been able to create a whole new constituency for his phenomenal reporting that goes beyond the short sound bites he gets on CBS radio.
Yeah, we talked about Mark yesterday in our segment of 140 characters, so that's great.
All right, well, thank you very much, Adam Sharp. We really appreciated you coming on.
All right, thank you for having me. Look forward to coming back.
This is Politics Powered by Twitter on POTUS.
SiriusXM POTUS.